Welcome to the Middleware Tech YouTube channel. In this series, you'll learn about dependency injection. All code examples used in the videos will be available on GitHub. Let's get started.
Task of IOC container or the task of IOC container. IOC container first, when the client it is going to parse the XML file. It is going to create the object and initialize the object. Now, when object creation and initialization is done, after that, what it will do is that it is going to manage the life cycle of the object, as well as it is used to implement dependency injection. So lifecycle management part will come. Let me talk about first some portion. Let me talk about dependency injection. Okay, let me talk about some portion about dependency injection. What does it mean? What is the meaning of the term dependency injection? What does it mean by this? All right, so let me just talk about. This is another important task, dependency injection in POJO classes. So this would be our next topic, how IOC container will help to create a dependency injection into the POJO classes. So this is the second task that we'll talk about here. So let's understand this using a separate diagram. Let me create that diagram using this paint. If you see here, let me just write it like, assume this is the client. Okay, this is a controller. Assume this is the business layer, or this is the DAO layer, and assume this is the database. Okay. Now here, this is I'm talking about. This is the client. This is the okay controller. Business class have some. I've not given a service layer, right? Okay. Sometimes we can implement the service layer in between. Or you can convert that business layer as a service layer also. That you can do that one also. Assume you find some thing different, you can just make it service layer, because we in our discussion we talked about service layer only, right? So let's see it's a service layer. This is what we talked about in our discussion. Fine. Now if you see here, this service layer, this service layer now see, we can say that this service layer have the dependency of the DAO layer. We can say that service layer have the dependency of the DAO layer, because to talk with the database DAO, DAO layer, need to use some connection pool. Similarly, when I say controller layer is going to interact with the service layer, then we can say that controller layer have the dependency of the service layer, right? Now the service layer, we can say that the service layer have the dependency of services like transaction. The service layer have the dependency of DAO layer. The service layer have the dependency of services like email or services like JMS. right? So this controller layer have the dependency of service layer have the dependency of DAO layer have the dependency of the connection pool. Like this way we can define the dependency of one layer with another layer. Like this way we can define the dependency of one layer with another layer, because client is interacting the controller layer, controller can call service layer, we can say that controller have the dependency of the service layer. Service layer have the service layer need to call the DAO layer, then we can say that service layer have the dependency of the DAO layer. DAO layer need to call the connection pool, so we can say that DAO layer have the dependency of the connection pool. Like this way we talked about the concept of dependency. Now, how we can define the concept of dependency injection? How we define the concept of dependency injection? Then, so when talking about this dependency injection, what we say, assume in our last discussion, what we say is that when the client request come, in our last discussion, what we say, when the client request come, client has sent a request. When the client request will come, this request will come to the IOC container or J2E container, right? Or application context container. Or just write it IOC container, that will be the best. IOC container. Now, what this IOC container, this IOC container is doing, what this IOC container is doing, this IOC container is going to interact with some of the DAO classes. Okay, this right, or this IOC container is going to parse the spring.xml, right? Whatever the objection you have created, and then it is going to create the object and it's going to return that object to the client, right? This is how it works. So what this is doing is that this IOC container will read this XML file and passes those data to the Pojo class. Assume for your case, you have created some Pojo class as class. You have some Pojo class related that EMP, assume a Pojo class is there. Right. So what it will do, this IOC container will read this XML file and pass those data. It will create the EMP object, right, and pass those data to your Bojo class. Correct? Okay. So just give me 1 minute. The injection. That means IOC container will create the object and initialize the object taking the value from this configuration file inside the Pojo class. So how IOC container will inject the value inside a Pojo class taking the value from this configuration file. So there is two approaches there. So one is called setter injection. When IOC container, so if you see here, when I'm just writing layman's language, when IOC container initialize the object, when IOC container will initialize the object, when IOC container will inject the attribute value using setter inside the Pojo, right? IOC container inject the attribute value, IOC container will inject the attribute value inside the POJO using setter. Okay, then we say it is a setter injection. Setter injection. Okay, and same like that, you can say that when IOC container will inject attribute value inside the POJO using constructor, then we say it is a constructor injection. So there is two types of dependency injection. When IOC container will inject the attribute value inside the POJO using constructor, using constructor, then we say it is a constructor injection. Constructor injection. Right, so we have these two types of injection is there. One is called setter injection. Dependency injections are two types. One is called setter injection. If you want if you want the POJO class should be initialized using setters, then this type of injection is said to be as an setter injection. And if you want the POJO class need to be initialized, POJO class attribute need to be initialized using constructor, then that type of injection is said to be as a constructor injection. So dependency injection comes into two: setter injection and constructor injection. Right? Right. So now what we'll talk about is that how we can implement setter injection, how we can implement constructor injection. We'll try to explore that side. How IOC container will setter injection, how IOC container will use constructor injection, that we are going to explore in the next part. Fine. So to understand this, let's try to focus this part first. Control C. Let me talk about this part. How this setter injection will work. How this setter injection will work. When IC control inject the attribute value inside a POJO using setter. Fine. So let's understand this setter injection using a separate example. Okay. So to implement that, what you have to do already, you know, we have to create a particular project. So what you have to do, we have to create a step one, you have to create project. Then we have to add all the jar file inside the project. We have to create a Java class, right? We have to create a Spring configuration file. We have to create a client.java. All the things are same only, just we have to implement that using setter injection, right? So let's do that one only. So for this, let's take a particular class. Let's do one thing, just close all the program that we have done. Let's create another one project. This time just write Spring IOC setter injection. Okay, so create a project, file, new project. I'm creating it separately, it will be helpful. I'll suggest also you also on the other side to create the project separately. Spring, you know, IOC, Spring IOC, setter, Spring IOC, setter injection. Spring IOC setter injection. Fine. Fine. So let's move next and finish. Now, Spring IOC setter injection, you have created a project. So as you know that when you have created a particular project, you have to add all the jar files inside the project. So add, not required all the jars, only for the timing bin and context. If you add, that will work for the timing. I'm just adding all the jar files. Fine. So I'll come into that segregation after some time. So I have created the project and I added all the jar files that is required. Right? I created the project and added all the jar files that is required for this project. Now here, what you can do is like, okay, now here what you want to do is that I want to get setter injection, right? So for setter injection, what you have to do, first I have to create a class. To create a class, create an EMP class, okay, create an employee class. Okay, for employee class object I want to see. So create an employee class, EMP employee class. And if you see this employee class, and here I want to create 3 instance variable. So already you know, right, how we can create all the instance variables. Private string EMP ID, private string EMP name, private string EMP DSC. Fine. So we have total 3 instance variable inside the class. Now right click, source, generate getters and setters. Since we are going to do setter injection, so I have just generated getters and setters. And right click, source, provide one constructor. Select default constructor. Let me just provide. So this is my this is a simple class that have instance variable and getters and setters. Fine. Okay, now so this class is ready. Next, what I have to do, I have to create the Spring configuration file. So right click, new file. Okay, use this file name as spring.xml. Now this file we should always create inside a separate package called resources. This is recommended resources. Just create it inside this. So as you know that if you created this file, we have to provide the grammar. So this grammar is already given in your API. Just copy that grammar from the API. Spring beans, factory XML, spring beans, and this is the line number you can copy from here, line number 36 and 37. This is the grammar that I want to use now. So this is my grammar is done. Okay, save it. Now when the grammar is done, now what I have to do is that I have to create an object of employee. So how to create an object inside the configure Spring file? Everything I have to create inside a bins. This is the root element in your spring.xml. Now what I want to do, I want to do setter injection. That means I want IOC container to use setter to inject the attribute value inside the POJO. That I want, right? So IOC container is going to use the setter. Using setter, it is going to inject the attribute value inside the POJO. Because, right? So how to create an object of the class? Using bin id equal to obj, id equal to obj, and if I want to create a particular class, so class A equal to, you can provide a particular class name, Or the class, we have employee class that is defined in the PP package. Employee PP dot employee, correct? So I've created an employee class object. Name of the employee class object is obj. Okay. So now this time, this is an object creation. When you're creating the object, I want this object to be initialized with a particular value of emp ID, emp name, and emp description. Okay, so how to do that? So we can write, since we are going to use setted injection, so we have to use property. Remember, we are going to use setted injection, so we have to use property. So select property. Or the first property name, emp ID. First property name is emp ID. And the value that I want to initialize, inside this emp ID, assume it is 1020. Next property I want to put here as Control C. Next property I want to put here as emp name. So this should be emp name. So I have used three property, right? emp ID, emp name, and emp DSC. So emp name, so just provide the emp name as Srini bus. Next property I want to put here as emp DSC. So emp DSC and emp DSC, and his the value, just make it that Srini is a developer. That's it. So what we have done, we have used the property element, and using property element, we have used property element, and using property element, we have initialized an emp object. We have used the property element, and using property element, we have initialized the emp object attribute, emp ID, emp name, and emp description. Correct? That's it. So what it will do, IC container will parse this, initialize this employee object with these values. And this is my Pojo class. So what I have to do is that I have to get a client class. Fine, let's create a client class. Right click class and just write the client class as client.java. And here, what you have to do, you have to get an object of application context. Application context SE equal to new class path XML application context. And here you just write resources slash spring.xml. Okay, just you have to import and save it. So what you have done, you have created an application context object, right? And this is the loading phase. Already I told you this is the loading phase. Now from the loading phase, what I want to do, I want to get all the details as a client. So what I can do is that I can write here AC dot get bin. Okay, so this is my bin. What are the object we have created? You can see here the object that we have created. Name of the object is given in the spring.xml file. Its name is obj. Okay, so when I got this object I want to take inside employee. emp equal to ac.getBin. You can just typecast with employee. Now after that, I want to print all the attribute value because already it is initialized by IOC container. Let me check it is coming or not. System.out.println. Just write here emp dot get id plus plus emp dot get name plus plus emp dot get description. That's it. Just save all, right click, run as Java application. Now if you see here the example that we have done, this is a good example of setter injection. When the request came to the IOC container will parse this XML file, create the object, initialize the object using this element values that is given in the property element. So property element means you should have a setter for that. Yes, I have the setter. It is using actually setter to initialize the object with that particular value, right? To understand whether it is calling setter or not, how to understand, just write something here. System.out.println, just write something here. Setter called. Control C, set emp id, Control B, set emp name, and Control V, description. In the client, if I'm going to execute once again, you can see here, just see here, setter called. So the injection that is done by the IOC container here, IOC container injecting all the attribute value inside a POJO using setter method, right? So when the client send a request that please provide me an EMP object, so client has provided the EMP object and that can contain all the attribute value that is initialized using setter injection by the IOC container, and it is working fine. Fine, guys, right? Okay. So I'll suggest please do the similar example in your system also. Try it in your system, check it is working in your system. Okay. Fine. So let's move to the next example. So here we talked about using setter injection. So let's talk about using constructor injection. Okay. So just now I talked about when IC container will inject attribute value inside a POJ using constructor. So that comes under constructor injection. Okay. So now talking about constructor injection. Let's talk about constructor injection. Now lots of things is there. When we talked about constructor injection, you have to deal with lots of parameters. So let's take the same example. We are just going to convert as a constructor example. Because in this case, IC container is using constructor to initialize the POJO attribute values, right? So do one thing. Let me take the same example. I'm not going to create once again. Create a separate project. Spring IOC constructor injection. Okay, I'm just getting a separate project. Spring IOC constructor injection. Okay, Spring IOC constructor injection. So just move and finish. And same code I want to copy and paste. I don't want to write once again the same things. Just I want to copy paste the same code here. And I have to add the jars also. properties, add external jars, open. Now in this constructor injection example, I have an employee class. Okay, assume I don't have any getters and setters. So remove all the getters and setters, removed, and I have to provide constructor. So provide a parameterized constructor, right click source, generate constructor using fields, generate. So I have given a parameterized constructor inside the Pojo class. Correct, fine. Now inside your spring.xml file, now here in this example, I have to use constructor, right? Not getters and setters. Whatever you have used here, that was the last example, is fine. But in this example, I have to use constructor, so not required this. So I'm creating an object of employee. Now here, when the request will come, container will, when the request will come, container will create or initialize all the attribute value using a constructor. So for this, we have already one element called constructor arg. You see here, bin definitions can specify 0 or more constructor arguments. There's an alternative to AutoWare constructor. I'll come to AutoWare part. So here I have to use this element to implement the constructor injection. Right? Okay. Now here in your class, you have multiple constructor, only 2 constructor you have written, right? Let me come one by one. Let me create a constructor using emp id first. Okay, let me create a constructor using emp id, only emp id. Okay, right click source, generate constructor using fields, just select emp id and generate. So I have created a constructor using emp id, right? Similarly, create another one constructor using emp name. Okay, so right click. So I have created only one constructor using emp id, right? So let me use this constructor here. I've used constructor argument. So I want to use emp id, right? So we can write here constructor argument value equal to 20 or 200. Constructor argument value equal to 200 and save it. So if you see this, when creating an employee class object and is initialize an object attribute with the value called 200. Correct? So let me check it is working or not. Let me check. Go to the client. In the client, I got an EMP object. After that, you do one thing, you just print this object. And if you print the object, you'll get the value only when right click source, you'll write to a string implementation. Save it. Let me check it is working or not. Right click, run as Java application. Now see here in this example, when the client request came, the EMP ID is initialized with EMP ID. Right? Client request came to the IOC container. IOC container will create the object, initialize the object attribute EMP ID with the help of constructor injection. Then only you can get this value. Because in your class, you have constructor only, there is no setters. Correct? Working fine? It's working fine, right? This constructor injection is working fine. This constructor is called. Now, what I want is that now in this example, it is calling a constructor with MP ID. If I have another one constructor with MP name, right-click source, generate constructor using field. I have another one constructor with MP name. I have another one constructor with EMP name, and it is giving some error. Okay, now in this example, it's only one argument constructor we are using, right? So we have to get a two argument constructor. Let's create a two argument constructor, the EMP ID and EMP name. Right click source, generate a constructor using field. I'm using EMP ID and EMP name. Fine. So I've created a two argument constructor this time. Right, in this time we have created a two argument constructor. Now what I want IOC container to use this constructor. I want IOC container to use this constructor to inject the attribute value inside the POJO. So regarding that, what I would do is that, so this part we have done. Just copy this, Control C, and source, toggle command. Let's do the second part, Control V. Now here, I introduce two constructor, right? So you can write here name and take another one constructor argument. This time I've used two constructor, right? Control C, Control V, and the second argument is name. So name you can use here as parameter, some name. Now save it here. Save this. Right? Now, if you see this spring.xml file, in the spring.xml file, we have parameterized constructor. So when I'm going to call the client, this is my parameterized constructor. This should be called. Let me check it is calling or not. Let me check. Right click, run as Java application. Yes, it is working fine. ID taken 200 and name I have taken parameter. So it is working fine, right? This EMP constructor, it is working fine. Now here, I'll do slight small change that is called type. We have another one attribute called type. If you provide type, then the value will come to that specific attribute. Assume I'm writing here parameter that is going to here as a type. So type equal to, I'm going to provide here as type, I'm going to write here as string, and here I'm going to write the type here as, I'm going to write the type here as int, or you can make it a string also. So if both are a string type, we have used, right? In our example, both are a string type. So if I'm going to provide a type like this, one is called a string, another is called int, it is going to work. Assume assume in your class, this is int, assume it is int. Okay, so if it is int, then it should be int and int empid, right? So one is int, another is a string. So if I somehow define the type, then whatever the sequence of your element, it does not matter. Parameter, it's a name, and name type I have written as a string, whereas empid is an int, and that I'm going to define using int. Then in that case, whatever the sequence you're going to follow inside your bin element, it is going to initialize the same object. Let me check it is working or not. Right click, run as Java application. So you can see here what it is saying is that creating an object obj defined in the class path, unsatisfied dependency expression constructor parameter 1. Okay, now here we have a name, a string type, then value, int type. You see the constructor, first name, then first int. So do one thing, just change this one. Let me check it is working or not. First I'm using here name. Okay, then you can use int empid. Let me check, save it. Right click, run as Java application. Just getting some error. What is the error? It is saying that correct reference of argument. Okay, so I have made something else here. I've created an employee class object. First I'm passing string type, value and type I have used. Second I have used value and type is int. So in the constructor I am using value and type int. It's correct only. So assume both are string. I have changed the attribute value as an int, right? So that's why. So if the attribute value is of int type, if the attribute value, let me remove this, delete. Attribute value is int type, empid, and it is a string type. It's okay. So first one is int type, and second one is a string type. A string emp name. And based on that only it's going to initialize. If I'm not going to use, first one is int type, control X, and second one is string type, control V. Int type and string type. You can save it. Right now here in this example, this is an int, this is a string, right? Okay, if you're not providing a type, by default it will take int. Not providing the type, by default it will take a string. It should work, right? It should work. Let me check. Right click, run as Java application. Yes, it is working fine. Okay, you have not given that to string. Right click, source, to string. save it, right click, run as Java application. It's working fine. Now in this example I have not used type, correct? Now what I want is that I want to provide another one argument. Okay, now I want to use 3 argument constructor. So let's create another one argument. Right click source, generate constructor using fields, generate. Now if you see here, I have 3 argument constructor. I want to use this 3 argument constructor. So if this is the need, in that case, you can just copy Control C. So toggle comment, Control V. Okay. Now I want to 3 argument constructor, right? So just add another one. Control C, Control V. And write the description as parameter is student. Is not student, correct? So just save it. Fine. So when you save this and go to client.java, right click, run as Java application. Now you can see here all this time IC container is using 3 argument constructor to initialize all the attribute value, and it is working fine. See here, there is no problem. IOC container is using this 3 argument constructor, this parameterized constructor to initialize all the attribute. So in that case, it is using this one, and it is working fine. Now the problem will come only when if you just change this 2 argument. Just change this 2 argument. If you just change the sequence of this 2 argument, that time the problem will come. Right click, run as Java. That time the problem will come. Just see. If you just sequence change, you can see here name become description, description become name. Right? So what is the solution? So to resolve this, we have 2 attributes. One is called type is there. You can provide the type. So using type, if you provide the type, then as well as index, just providing type and index, you can resolve this. Okay. So if you see here, what I want is that just see here. Here I'm just writing. It is not correct sequence, right? So first this one, this is what I have used a value. Value is of type. Type is int. Okay. Now this is of type string. Type equal to a string. This is also type string. Type a string. Right. So just save all. And if you execute client.java, you can see it's working. No, it is giving some error. Let me check what is the problem. Creating bin, defined class path, unsatisfied dependency expression, argument for type string did not satisfy correct reference to the argument. Okay, so do one thing, just change this index equal to 0. This is the first index. The second index, index equal to 1, 0, 1, and this is the third index, right? Just write index equal to 2. So what I've done is that in this example, I have just used the index attribute to identify the index of a particular attribute inside the constructor. So first one is index 0 is ID, index 1 is name, index 2 is description. Index 0 is ID, index 1 is name, index 2 is description. Correct? So right click, run as Java application. And you can see here when I've given the index, it is working fine. Whatever the sequence you have, if you just remove and move it in the last position, then also it should work, because here I have used index to identify the position of a particular element inside the constructor. Right click, run as Java application. It is working fine. Right? So what we find in this example is that if we have two now another one things I want to say, in this example, this is int, right? This is an int, okay, and this is a constructor using an int empid. I want to create another one constructor using a string. Right click, source, generate constructor using field, deselect all. I'm using a string. So if you see here, I have two constructors. One is using int, another is using a string. And from your configuration file, just disable this, source toggle comment, and in your configuration file, now in your configuration file, if you see here, right click, source, format, save it. Now if you see here, I'm passing an constructor with some argument. Right now in your class, you have two constructors. One is constructor with int and constructor with a string. I'm passing only one argument, right? So which constructor will be overridden? Constructor with int or constructor with a string? Let me check. Go to client, right click, run as Java application. If you see here, the constructor with a string get overloaded. Just see here. Inside your class, you have constructor with a string and constructor int both. In the configuration file, you're passing a particular value, 200. So when you pass a particular value in the constructor, by default, constructor with string will be overloaded, not the constructor with int. Right? So what the property we find is that if we have two overloaded constructor, by default it will call constructor with string. You got one point, right? So what we find here is that if we have two overloaded constructor, if we have two overloaded constructor, by default it will call, it will call Constructor with string. Constructor with string. Yes, it is calling this one only constructor with string. And it is working fine. Right now, now the question is that no, I want to override the constructor with int. By default, it is overriding the constructor with the string. No, I want to override the constructor with int. So what I have to do? I have to provide here one attribute called type. So just write here type equal to int. Just write type equal to int, save it, and right click, run as Java application. Now see here, it is calling int. Correct. So what you are going to do there? What is the advantage of using type? So by using type, you can overload an specific constructor. By using type, I can overload an specific constructor. Yes, so we got another one point here. By using type, we can overload a constructor. Fine. Okay. Now another one point we find just now is that if we have more than 2 argument, then we can use index, right, to point each position inside the constructor. Just now we have done, right? So you can write like, I'm writing layman's language just to point out whatever we have done. If we have more than 2 parameter, if we have more than 2 parameter, if we have more than 2 parameter, then we can use index. Then we can use index to point each position in the constructor. We can use index to point each position in the constructor. To point each position in the constructor. Is position in the constructor. That's it. Right. So we find what in this example we talked about constructor injection. We talked about setter injection both. So container will use constructor injection. Container will use setter injection to inject the attribute value inside the POJO. Container will use setter injection, or container will use constructor injection to inject the attribute values inside the POJO. This is working fine, right? Okay. Now if you see here in this example, what we have done in this example, we have used an EMP class. Correct? We have used EMP class. And EMP class, we have getter setters as well as we have constructor, and we have talked about right click, so format. We talked about dependency injection. Okay, we talked about dependency injection using setter as well as using constructor both. Right now if you see this file spring.xml. Here, if you see, when you are going to provide the value inside your spring.xml file, here using value, using this attribute name value, you are providing the value. Using the attribute name value, you are providing the value to the constructor. Right? Using the attribute name value, you are going to provide the value to the constructor. Correct? Correct? Now, this type, when you are providing some parameter, so when I'm going to provide this, what you are going to provide? String, you are going to provide int. What happened? We are going to provide some primitive value. So to provide primitive data, we are using the attribute called value. To provide primitive data, IOC container is using, to initialize primitive data, IOC container is using value attribute. To initialize primitive data, IOC container is using value attribute. Correct? What if I find in both the scenario? In both the scenario, what you find is that to initialize primitive value, primitive data, IOC container using value attribute. To initialize primitive data, IOC container is using value attribute. You can see here, to initialize primitive data, IOC container is using value attribute for both constructor or setter, for both. To initialize primitive data, IOC container is using value attribute. Yes. Similarly, to you can pass an object reference also inside another object. Okay. Right, that is called secondary type injection. Secondary type we have not told you. So to initialize or to implement secondary type injection, we use reference. So let me talk about some point about secondary type, then it will not work. What does it